Hi guys, and welcome to my very first YouTube video. This is Hannah from HannahMariaPlans, and today we're going to jump right into my November plan with me, where I'll show you how I created this dreamy clouds theme. I hope it helps you feel inspired as we move into the dark and cold months of the year, and motivates you to do something special. We've got a lot to do, but first let's take a look back at October in my journal. This month, I've decided to focus on clouds and their beauty. I like to start off with a monthly cover page, and this time I'm using watercolour paper. I'll start with taping the edges to get a crisp white border. I'd also normally tape it down so it doesn't warp, but this one is attached all the way round anyway, so it's not something we need to worry about. I plan on then sticking it into my Archer and Olive journal that I've been using since October. Once I've sketched out the design, I'm using masking fluid to fill in the sun. This repels the watercolour, and I can peel it off later to leave me with a bare white paper underneath. Peeling it off is incredibly satisfying. I'm going to take you through how I create this painting. I know it looks quite complex, but with the layers that you build up, it's actually fairly achievable. For the first layer of the sky, I'm using a big wet brush to dampen the paper. This means the paint will spread out and blend together easily. I'm making the top of the sky darker as it reaches up towards space, and the bottom of the page lighter as it moves towards the horizon. Once that layer is dry, I can start to build some colour around the sun. If you don't wait until it's dry, you might mix the blue and the yellow, giving you a green sky. I then start to build some intensity in the blues by layering more colour on top. This is one of the reasons I'm using watercolour paper rather than my Archer and Olive notebook. Although the Archer and Olive has beautifully thick and lovely feeling paper, it tends to allow watercolours to bleed through the page unless it's used in very thick consistency. To create the clouds themselves, I'm using a white gouache. Gouache is similar to watercolour, but is opaque rather than transparent, which makes it perfect for this. Other than some glittery gold gouache, which I'm not really counting, I have literally never used this type of paint before. You are watching my very first attempt, so please keep in mind that anything you see me do here might be completely wrong. In order to build texture in the clouds, I'm using watercolour and gouache on their own, and sometimes I'm even mixing them together. To make the clouds look nice and fluffy, you need to get the contrast between light and dark. Surprise, surprise, the dark colours come from adding darker paint. Normally, to get lighter colours using watercolour, you just add more water. But here I'm adding gouache to get some light blues that will really stand out on the page. I looked at a lot of photographs and paintings of clouds to get them looking fairly realistic. I definitely don't think I got it right everywhere, but as I keep practicing, their shapes have started to make a little bit more sense to me. I've included some references in the description below, including one particular painting which was a huge influence here. I found using the thick white gouache on its own was best for the real highlights, points where the sun would be hitting normally. If I accidentally added too much white in one area, I could just add some more water and blend it out again. I literally just kept adding layers until I was happy with how it looked overall. The next step is removing the masking fluid. I'm using the end of a rubber here, but your fingers will work just as well. Once you're done, it's time to peel off the tape, which is always my favourite part. I didn't get completely clean edges at the bottom here, but it doesn't matter this time because I'm going to be cutting it off. To secure it in my journal, I make sure it's cut to size, and then I'm using any old glue stick to stick it in. Next, we can move on to the monthly calendar. I have used exactly the same setup here for about a year, and although I sometimes experiment for a month, I always end up coming back to this. As a doctor, I work in shifts, and I'm currently working in a lot of different departments, so there's a lot for me to keep track of. I use the column on the left for all of my work commitments, and the wider column on the right for everything else. The illustration on this page is supposed to be a continuation of the cover page, but it's a really good example of what happens when everything goes wrong. Although I've used this notebook for over a month, I still struggle with how it handles paint. Sometimes the paper will bleed with next to no water, and sometimes it will be absolutely swimming and will hold up really well. One thing that notebook paper is never good at doing is blending watercolours, because it tends to soak in too quickly. This is the big mistake I made here, and I really didn't want the bold blue and yellow stripes. My solution? Just paint over it and kind of start again. It was definitely another unforeseen benefit of gouache here. I still battled with getting this how I wanted it, but I eventually got bored and decided it was probably good enough. Looking back on it now, it's not as bad as I first thought it was, and it's a good example to me of persevering even when I don't want to. The next spread in my November setup is my to-do list and habit tracker, which I tend to have split across 2 pages, often with one main illustration, which helps me to save space and time. I start by taping the edge of the semicircle that I created using a compass and marking out the areas for the clouds in pencil. This time I'm going to be painting directly into my journal, so I have to be mindful of how much water I'm using. The paints I'm using throughout this video are part of a custom palette that I started compiling in winter last year. I had been using watercolours for a few months and was starting to want something that performed better than my first paints. This palette is a mixture of different brands including Daniel Smith, M. Graham and Core, and I really love using it. If you're just starting out in watercolour, I recommend you buy something fairly cheap to make sure you enjoy the medium first. Once you know you want to continue, buy art supplies that make you want to use them. It doesn't matter what price they are, as long as you can afford it, but don't buy something so expensive you're afraid to use it, or something that makes you frustrated because your materials aren't allowing you to do what you want to. If you love using something, you will keep practicing with it, and if you keep practicing it, then you'll see improvement and be able to achieve the things that you want to. Once I was happy with the clouds, I moved on to the night sky itself, first starting with the moon using some more white gouache. Normally, I would use dilute white ink to splatter my stars on the sky, but because I've already finished the clouds and didn't want them covered in little white dots, I've used a Posca white paint pen. Now onto the tracker itself. I have been tracking the same habits for absolutely ages, but that doesn't mean I'm very good at doing them. Some people like to use their tracker to motivate them to actually do something, whereas I like to use mine a little differently. Don't get me wrong, I love colouring in that little box that says, "Yay me, I did something," but mostly like to use it when I'm reflecting back on my month. Say I managed to start going to the gym again consistently and have lots of little colourful squares. At the end of a month, do I feel more energised for doing that? Do I feel a bit more fit, but more stressed having sacrificed some of my evening downtime? What do I need right now? I then try to carry that into the following month, so I'm more mindful of how I'm using my time. The other side of the spread is my big to-do list for the month. Literally anything I need to do is lumped in here, and is usually split into one of those 3 categories. Our next spread is a relatively new addition to my journal. I use this as an Instagram tracker, and it has 2 main purposes. The first is to jot down all the pages I want to create, and I can mark when I've finished it, photographed it, edited it, and posted it. This way I can write down all of my ideas without them swimming around in my brain. The second purpose is to write down what I want to post and when. I also like to keep track of the stats for each post to see the general trends and guide my content, but I always like to make it clear that numbers do not measure the worth of your account. I love the community on Instagram, and I feel that the connections made across the platform are far more important. I try to make this double spread more minimal in its design, but can never help introducing a few decorations so that it fits in with the monthly theme. You can see me using more washi tape to block off certain areas of the page so that I can keep painting, but also keep my nice clean lines intact. Our final spread in this video is the first weekly spread of the month. This time, I decided to have 2 separate spreads for 1 week, as October finishes on a Thursday and November starts on a Friday. If I'm feeling a bit lazy or don't have the time, I won't do this, and I never do it if there is only one outlying day. I decided that I wanted to do another full page illustration opposite a very simple weekly layout. I'm painting directly into the journal and using washi tape to mark out the edges. Washi tape really is my best friend when painting in my journal. This piece is inspired by another artist on Instagram that I will link to below. It shows a cloudy sunset scene and really allowed me to explore some more colours and textures with the gouache. I mixed 3 of my favourite watercolours with the white gouache to get all the colours that you can see in the sky. These colours were French Ultramarine, Hansa Yellow Deep and Quinacridone Rose, which make up the 3 primary colours if you know your colour wheel. I found that the gouache mix sits on top of the Archer and Olive paper a lot more than watercolour on its own, which meant that no paint went through the paper at all, and that I could blend my colours directly on the page. This was a really satisfying process, although I did find creating the clouds quite difficult. I like to create my weekly spreads as I go through each month, rather than setting them all up in one go. One reason for this is that I tend to paint a little in my journal on most days as a way of unwinding after work. This means that I might start something and spend half an hour on it, and not finish it until the next day or even the day after, or even sometimes the week after. I find it really difficult to find huge chunks of time to spend setting things up, but I do know some people prefer to do it that way. I always get people asking how I can fit in making elaborate decorations in my journal with my job as a doctor, and for me, little and often is the way. I'm using some black gouache to paint the bottom landscape and just adding little lumps and bumps to create hedges and trees to contrast against the sky. any black felt tip would work just as well for this part. Once this is dry, I'm using my Posca paint pen again to write a quote which I think suits this spread perfectly. I hope it's one we can both carry into November with us. Beautiful sunsets need cloudy skies. It's time for our last satisfying tape peel of the day, and then we're finally done with our November setup. To all of you who have made it this far in the video, thank you so much. I really hope you enjoyed this November plan with me. I can't believe we are already this far through 2019, but secretly I'm quite happy because, as you might have noticed, it's my birthday month. If you have any tips on how to improve this video or what you'd like to see in any future videos, please leave a comment below. I am a complete beginner at this and would really appreciate anything you have to say at all. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to see more content on this page, and come find me over on HannahMariaPlans for daily content on my Instagram feed. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope to see you next time. Bye.